Welcome to the Cyber Business Podcast, where we feature top founders and entrepreneurs and share their inspiring stories. Now, let's get started with the show.
Matthew Connor here, host of the Cyber Business Podcast. Today, we're fortunate to have Jan Mast, the Director of Global Cybersecurity at AeroVironment. Jan, welcome to the show.
Hi, Matthew. Thank you. I appreciate it. It's an honor to be here.
It's an honor to have you. Before we get too far in, a quick word from our sponsors. This episode is brought to you by cyberlinks.com. That's cyberlynx.com. Do you know if a hacker's in your system? Most people and most companies don't until it's too late and the hacker's already done damage. A hacker's job is to bypass security, so companies need a way of knowing when someone's gotten past their security. That's where Cyberlinks comes in. We've partnered with the best cybersecurity companies in the world to be able to provide our clients with the best solutions at the best prices. So whether it's managed SIEM, SOC, EDR, MDR, XDR, you name it, we'll help you find the right solution at the best price. Contact us at cyberlinks.com. That's cyberlynx.com. And now back to our show. Jan, for those who aren't familiar, can you tell us about AeroVironment and your role there as Director of Global Cybersecurity?
Sure thing. So AeroVironment is a defense contracting company. So we design, engineer, manufacture unmanned, or as they say in the industry now, uncrewed systems. So so aerial and ground systems, and we're actually acquiring another company, and through that merger, they have underwater uncrewed systems as well. So now we're like going to be the SEAL team of drones, if you will.
Okay, that's cool. I mean, geez. Okay, that is super cool. Wow, I don't even know where to start with that. So like, can we talk about that? Kind of some of the products and stuff. We won't deep dive because it's not, that's not really what this is all about. But I think it's a fascinating, it's a fascinating topic. And can we dive into that a little bit?
Absolutely. And a quick fun fact, if you don't mind, is I retired from the Navy in 2018. Since I left the Navy, I've worked at three different companies, and all of those jobs have been supporting unmanned systems.
That's awesome. So these, can you talk about the new underwater unmanned systems that you kind of what you can talk about, right? Is this are we talking like, I mean, that's fascinating. I mean, basically a sub type of situation that is completely unmanned, or is it more for reconnaissance, or is this are these more like underwater, assault vehicles, if you will? What kind of underwater uncrewed things are we talking about?
Yeah, so I don't have a whole lot of data on these, for example, because the day after we announced that we were acquiring this other company, the very next day, it was publicly announced that company had acquired this other small company that has that capability. So I don't think it's a munition type situation like one of our other products. And Switchblade is probably the household name if we have one, which is a loitering. They call it a loitering munition. So it goes up and flies a pre-planned pattern, and then when a target's acquired, the operator can guide it into into that target, and it is a munition. So the underwater systems, if you will, I don't believe they're munitions. I believe they're more along the lines of ISR capabilities.
Super cool. Okay, so to give everybody kind of an idea of the scale of what you're working with there, or kind of directing / managing that, how when it's global cybersecurity, how many what's the scale that we're looking at here? Give people an idea.
So AeroVironment has we have multiple offices across the United States. We also, as I mentioned in the intro, we have uncrewed ground systems as well. Those are robotics in nature, things like that EOD squads use for for taking care of suspicious packages and things like that. So that capability, we acquired that when we bought a German company named Telerob, and then by de facto we opened our office there in Germany. So we are looking at expanding in other places, internationally. But for now, we have we have the office there in Germany, and then we have offices here in the United States. So most of our operations run out of California. So I'm here in San Diego. The kind of our main site is north of LA. We have in Northern California we have offices as well. Let's see, and then Kansas, Huntsville, Alabama, Virginia. Every defense contractor has to have at least a broom closet that they call headquarters in somewhere in
Yeah.
the DC area. So we have that as well.
Well, and you wouldn't suspect, I think a lot of people wouldn't suspect that you'd have a lot of kind of, government contracting, manufacturing in California. I think that's a little surprising to me. They're just not, it doesn't seem like it's generally a place where you'd expect that kind of, yeah, Virginia, kind of heartland, middle America, great for, industrial manufacturing, Texas, you name it. Was it because it started in California and just kind of grew from there?
Correct. So the company was founded more than 50 years ago by an enterprising engineer named Paul McCrady, and it was all based out of here in California. So that's really been kind of the genesis of the company, and I think that's why they continue to keep kind of the main hub of activity and operations out of California.
Okay. So when it comes to things like, obviously CMMC is a big, topic for government contractors. And so that's going to be very pressing for you. Do you find it, how's that work when you're talking now you're global? I mean, I get it for a local or like a US based only company, but then once you start throwing in Germany, that becomes a little challenging with with CUI and CMMC. How do you manage that?
Yeah, great question. And it is challenging. Fortunately, we're a big Microsoft customer. We're in so Microsoft actually has, some advantages and with data residency. So just to kind of say it simply, they're subject to everything GDPR. So all the data has to reside there in the EU. And Microsoft has some great services and technology that allows us to have that clean separation between the two. Of
Nice.
course, we have email and we have, Teams and everything between the two companies. So that kind of comes down to training more than anything.
Yeah. That's great. I mean, that makes perfect sense because you think about it, if you're all in the same tenant and it's like, well, crap, that makes it a little more challenging. But yeah, with nice clean separation of church and state there, that's fantastic. Well, all right. Well, let's dive into a little bit to your background because I love this part where talking about the backgrounds of our different guests. I mean, we've had people come on who were truck drivers who got into IT, who were the military got into IT, people who were you know grew up as a hacker getting into IT. So it's kind of the whole spectrum, and I love hearing the kind of discussing people's stories, how they got from where they started in life to where they are now. So can you take us through your background there?
Sure thing. So I think I probably have a fairly interesting background. Grew up in kind of a tough circumstances, dirt poor in the Midwest, raised by a single mother. We lived in a trailer park for many, many years. We were homeless for a period of time, living in a campground. So, so I'll say that my background, from getting from where I was to where I am has been, a combination of some good advice I've taken, some solid choices, but also, it's been people along the way kind of seeing things in me that I didn't necessarily see in myself. So I feel like I'm very fortunate to grow up in the United States. In my opinion, it's the greatest country on earth, and I feel like if I'd been born in these kind of circumstances in another country in another situation, I may not have had the opportunities that I have. So I feel like being where I am is kind of a confluence of all those things.
I love it. So, well, let's dive into that a little bit. So, and it's funny because we have very similar background, except it wasn't a single mother. The trailer was there for we had the trailer, And then for me, it was the Army was my way out of that. And I
Mhm.
think for you, it was the Navy.
Correct. So, yeah, my mom always told me you're going to go to college or you're going to go to the military. You're going to do something with your life, right? You're not going to, live in the basement, your whole life and eat Hot Pockets. And so I took that seriously because they told me, when you turn 18, you graduate high school, you're getting kicked out of the house, so figure out what you're doing, right?
Love it.
So I looked at the branches of service because I knew that I was an idiot, straight up I was a moron, book smart, but like I didn't have any common sense about me, so I knew that even if I got into the work study program at the College of the Ozarks, I'd just piss it away because I was just not mature in any form or fashion. So early on, I kind of decided I was going to join the military. So I looked at the different services. Not to disparage anyone. I know you're in the Army. I won't hold that against you,
I
but
appreciate that. My wife
uh,
was Navy, and she doesn't hold it against me either. So we're somehow we make it work.
fair enough. So I didn't really consider the Air Force because I feel like they didn't really do anything. Plus, the rumit was that it's really hard to advance in the Air Force, right? I'd always heard it called the Chair Force.
Yep.
Didn't really want to get shot at on a regular basis, so I figured, Marine Corps and Army probably not for me. So it's kind of down to the Coast Guard or the Navy, right? And I'm like, wow, they're both seaborne. Coast Guard, it seems like an exciting mission, but you don't really go anywhere.
Yeah.
So I was like, if I join the Navy, I can see the world. Yeah. So it's actually kind of an interesting story, if you don't mind.
Please. Love it.
I contacted the Navy recruiter, and he comes over to our house, right? And he gives me this, the little pre-test, the pre-ASVAB test or whatever they call it, and I
Uh-huh.
scored really well. And he starts to give me a sales pitch. And I was like, look, you know, I've kind of already joined, decided I'm going to join the Navy, but I have one question for you that's going to seal the deal. And I see his face, and he's like, okay, go ahead. So I asked him, I was like, are there any Navy bases? Because we lived in Branson, Missouri at the time. I'm like, are there any Navy bases in Missouri? He's like, no, there's no Navy base. There's a Fort Leonard Wood Army base, right? And
Basic training.
and I was like, so there's no, you're telling me there's no chance I'm going to get stationed in Missouri? And he's like, yeah, literally no chance. I'm like, good, sign me up. I'll go anywhere. Just get me out of here.
That's awesome. I wish I'd had the foresight to ask that question. Yeah, I was the same way about Pennsylvania. I left when I was 18 and I never went back. But I did go to Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri, 7 days after graduating, actually 5 days after graduating high school. I found myself in at Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri. So, and I don't blame you for not wanting to stay. That was a that was that. I mean, it was a pretty interesting summer there because that's yeah. But
Yeah,
don't blame me.
we had moved from, so I grew up mostly in Quincy, Illinois.
Mhm.
Not a great place to be either.
Uh,
But there at least had friends when in my sophomore year of high school, we did the mom and her boyfriend decided to pack up and move to Branson, Missouri. So, poor kid in a rich kid town. I didn't enjoy country music. They literally played country music in the streets on loudspeakers.
wow.
And yeah, I didn't like, it's like they look at me, because I didn't enjoy NASCAR and I had all my teeth. So they're like, we don't know where you're from, but you're definitely not from here. And I didn't have the accent either, the Missouri or yonder. Yeah, I
Yeah.
didn't say any of those things. So yeah, I was very much kind of an outsider there.
That's awesome. Well, let's talk about your time in the Navy. I mean, because I think we were both in Japan at the same time. I think I'd actually joined the Army in '94, and but then I ended up being over in the Tokyo area at Camp Zama in at the end of '99. But you were over there as well, weren't you?
I was, yeah, it's kind of an interesting nexus. So, I joined in '96, so I guess you come in 2 years before me, which makes you ancient. Yeah.
Yeah,
Um,
we've been
so
around.
yeah, so I joined in in 96, a few months after graduating from high school, shipped off in late July, had the pleasure, heavy on the sarcasm there, of going through boot camp in Great Lakes, so north of Chicago and Illinois,
Yeah.
hot, muggy. Yeah, it was pretty horrible. And then, so when I joined, I took the ASVAB, I scored reasonably well, and they kind of asked me, what do you want to do in the Navy? Um, I think this was my first time acting on good advice, like in my entire life. A guy that I worked with in a restaurant, yeah, he was a Navy veteran, and he was a veteran. He was a nuclear trained and from the submarine force. And he told me, he's like, Jan, I hear you joined the Navy. If you have any self-respect, if you care about yourself at all, don't volunteer for submarines and don't go into the nuclear force. So and the funny thing is they offered me both those things, and I was like, I'm going to decline, the submarine force and the nuclear program. And so they asked me like, well, what do you want to do? And I said, I don't know. I like computers, which I kind of totally made up. It was something I was interested in, but didn't really have any experience. So I was like,
Uh-huh.
yeah, computers are cool. Let's do something like
Right.
that. So so they said we have this awesome advanced electronics computer field. You have to sign up for 6 years. You go through 2 years of training initially, right? You get I think they gave me an $8,000 enlistment bonus, which,
Nice.
yeah, poor kid from the Midwest, that was a lot of money, which I burned through really quickly. But yeah, that was kind of how I got there, right? And so I ended up after boot camp, spending the next year and a half there in Great Lakes, Illinois, going through what they call Tech Core, introduction to electronics, and then through electronics technician A school. And that was kind of a pivotal time for me because I kind of sailed through high school. Like I didn't really care very much. I would sit through the classes. I didn't ditch. I'd go to class because my mom would kill me if I didn't. Yeah, so I went to class. Sometimes I'd do the homework, usually not. I'd just take a zero, and yeah, unless there was corporal punishment there. But I found that I could sit through the lecture and then just pass the test, and I didn't really care. But when it came to joining the Navy, my prime motivation was getting out of Illinois, Missouri, and not going back. So sitting through Tech Core, I realized that I didn't know how to learn, right?
Yeah.
So I was like, wow, this is going to be a tough, year and a half. But even if, you know, I don't do anything socially, even if, all I do is go to class and then study, until I fall asleep and then wake up and do it the next day. I was determined to be a success. So I found at this time I really had to teach myself how to learn. So it's kind of a pivotal experience for me.
That's awesome. I mean, I think that's a great story. I mean, where the military for a lot of people is their way out of poverty. I mean, it's either stay in the whatever the crappy town you're in, the crappy situation you're in, and be like everybody else there, or join the military and do something about it. While it's not the most lucrative, we certainly didn't get rich in the military, that's for sure. I think mine was a $5,000 bonus because I was a Spanish interrogator. I signed up for that, and it
Wow.
was $5,000, which after taxes is was all of about what, 3,000. They took off a hefty chunk. I was like, oh, okay. And
Sure
then
do.
we only got I only got half of it the first year, and then it was spread out over like the rest of like another year or something. So it ended up being like $1,000, and then maybe $100 extra a month after that. So we certainly didn't get rich, but it really did give me the chance to get out of there, get to college, and make my way in the world. So it really does open doors for people, which I think is just fantastic. And yeah, we have it's largely the poor kids fighting the wars, but you know what, it gives them the opportunity to do something, where they might not have had it in that hometown, and they were just surrounded by a bunch of other, people that they didn't want to be like. So I think it's the greatest thing.
I'm glad you mentioned that because that was actually a huge part of it, and because the guys I grew up, with, particularly in Quincy, I was friends with, today they're truckers or roofers or, physically, I don't, I think they had some injuries and can't be a roofer anymore, but, working as like a maintenance guy at a school. And I'm going to disparage that. Any
Yeah, of
work is
course.
honorable,
Yep.
but I just knew that being stuck there wasn't what I wanted for my life. Like I didn't know, what I wanted to do or what I wanted to be, but I knew that wasn't it.
Yeah.
And in fact, that was, kind of my vision for my future was so myopic that until I got married, you know, well, maybe it changed when I joined the Navy, but I figured I wouldn't survive past 30,
Right. That's why would you? And you when that's kind of what you see around you, people that they don't take care of themselves. They just have a different view on life, and it's not
Right.
necessarily, and it's not. I don't think what one would consider a successful view on life. And so, yeah, the military really helps with that, to help give you an opportunity to get your shit squared away, to get disciplined, to get serious about your life. So you see these kids go in at 18, but by the time they're, in their early 20s, they're much more mature than a kid who just went to college and partied for 4 years. I mean, they've now seen the world. They've been instilled with discipline and character that they didn't have prior to joining. And so, I think it's great. So let's talk a little bit. So after the Navy, I mean, you spent a good chunk of time in the Navy. I mean, I got out after 10. I think you were 20 years, weren't you?
Correct. 23 years,
Nice. Great. So you got your Navy retirement, and then what'd you do?
Yeah, so leading up to, I had a really detailed plan for getting out of the Navy. And interestingly enough, my primary concerns were, one, would my military skills transition to the civilian workforce, right? That was kind of the main thing because my wife, I married her during my time in Japan, and she wasn't working; she was raising our son. Yeah, so I have to be the primary breadwinner, right? But also, what was I going to wear every day? And, could I say fuck anymore? Right. Those were kind of my primary concerns. But leading up to my time, because it's something I took very seriously, that transition.
Yeah.
And, I looked at the career prospects for electronics technician. I could go be kind of field service technician, for like a manufacturing company or something like that. And probably earn a decent living. There's nothing wrong with that. But I was always drawn towards computers and IT, right? Even my time on active duty, I was my NEC was super high frequency satellite communications, right? And then I also, went to other schools and gained other NECs in my time. But that was the first school I went to. So I always considered myself to be a SATCOM tech, right? But I wanted to be like the full WAN guy, right? From the computer to the network to the sat link to the other side, right?
Love it.
So I was really interested in IT, kind of building, toward the kind of the back half of my career and looking at prospects post Navy. So I asked, friends of mine who were either still in the Navy or had gotten out and were in the IT career field. And I was like, hey, I'm thinking about going IT. And every single one of them said, go security. It's like, wow, really? Why? What's your rationale there? And one guy, Greg, he was like, I worry about getting shit canned every day because IT managers are a dime a dozen, which I don't think that is necessarily true.
You're right.
Uh, but but I understood the sentiment, right? There was maybe less job security there, I think is what he's trying to tell me. And then he said if you look at the IT security field, cybersecurity, it's always unmanned. There's always a shortage of people, of labor.
Yep.
So that was maybe, another great piece of advice that I took. So from that point forward, I just kind of geared my education towards, a career in cybersecurity. Knocked out a master's degree in cybersecurity, the CISSP certification, as well as trying to gain experience while still on active duty. So when the time came, for me, it was a pretty easy transition. I also had the security clearance, so um, but I had a decade or more of experience as a manager in the Navy as a chief petty officer, but I was intent on coming into the civilian workforce as an individual contributor, as a non-managerial position. So having the degree, the certification, and some relevant experience, it translated nicely into a what they call an ISM position at Northrop Grumman. So being in charge of the cybersecurity compliance posture for classified systems. So that was kind of my first jump into the civilian workforce.
That's great. It's funny because a lot of guys, and some of which we've had on the show, it was really, they were kind of terrified, honestly. Very, very of the transition. It's tough. I mean, after so many years, it is almost, you become almost institutionalized.
I
It's
say
been
that all
20
the time.
years,
Those words.
yeah, and I think it's really challenging. Did you have the same thing, or I mean, you seem pretty well prepared. You looked at it ahead of time. You got the degrees. You had a job set up. Probably right afterwards. You moved right into a job. But how was that transition? Because we've talked to others who, they kind of want to go back after, and there's no real going back after 20 years. You either move into government work, which a lot of them do, but the civilian side is, that it's scary for a lot of people. How was it for you?
Yeah, so I knew that. So I never wanted active duty. I never wanted to be anything but a chief, right? And I achieved that. So I spent the last, I think, 12 years as a chief, right? And if they had promoted me, then fantastic. I wouldn't have turned it down. But I didn't do the things that I knew that I would have needed to do in order to get that star or those extra 2 stars, right? Um, so for me, my identity wasn't wrapped up in being a chief petty officer in the U.S. Navy, right? I was a sailor, a husband, a father, right? A patriot. I guess if you were to ask me what I identify as, that's probably what I would have said.
Love it.
And I looked around, like I looked at when I worked at the Type Commander, Surf Pack, my boss there, they forced him out at 30 years, right? But I could tell that his identity was so wrapped up in being a Master Chief Petty Officer in the Navy, he didn't want to let go. Like literally, he was calling the detailer saying, "I'll go any billet anywhere in the world. Give me a worse billet. I don't care. Just let me stay." And they told him, "No, it's 30. You got to go." Right? I just didn't. I didn't want to be that. Right?
Yeah.
Um, plus I stayed in 23 years. That's a good long time in any organization. So
Yep.
I joined right out of the Navy. I had some experience in the restaurant business as a, washing dishes and bussing tables. I worked at a construction site for a while as a manual laborer. So my experience was pretty minimum other than, what I did in the Navy.
Yeah.
So I was pretty excited to join the civilian workforce. So
Great.
I think that's one of those things that helped me kind of make that transition maybe a little more smoothly.
Yeah. No, that's beautiful. Well, look, I like to ask people, what advice they'd give, somebody coming into, the, let's say, security. So what advice would you give somebody, fresh, thinking about coming into into cybersecurity for a career?
Yeah, great question. I would say, cybersecurity is built on top of IT. If you don't know IT, I mean, there's some people who come in later in life with significant management and leadership and experience and can make that transition into, like a CISO or a CIO role. I think even that in that case, it's pretty hard. You have to be really, really sharp. So my advice is be brilliant on the basics. Know the basics of IT really well. That's why I always love to poach from, from the sysadmin teams, or, anyone who's been a systems administrator, or, network engineer, like those kinds of people, because they have that, that foundation. It's like, I know it's cliche, but the house has to have a solid foundation to sit on,
Yes.
right? So if you understand the basics really well, then I think that sets you up for a great career in cybersecurity.
I love that because I think you look at the greats in anything. I mean, look at basketball. It's not about being great at some trick shot. The greats are great at the fundamentals of the game. They are really fantastic at the basics, and they practice them incessantly. And so they're really good. And I think that applies to everybody in everything. If you want to be great at something, be great at the fundamentals, be great at the basics, and the rest you'll have this great foundation to build on. But if you're not great at that, the fancy shit, it's you're going to be okay at it maybe if you really try, but you got to have the basics down. So I think that's fantastic advice for career, for life, you name it. Well, let me ask you kind of a very similar question. What advice would you give somebody coming out of the Navy, or out of the military, looking to go into the civilian world?
Decide what you want to be when you grow up, and then become it. Yeah. So I'd say have a plan, really. Plans change. Maybe draw up this detailed plan, and then you decide you want to do something different. You throw it out the window, right? But and maybe that's my kind of personality. I took one of those. I forget what they're called, but one of those personality tests, and it told me I was a INTJ, which you call it. It said mastermind, which I think is actually pretty accurate for me personally, because look at, if I need to get from point A to point B, there may be one way to get there, but there might be two or three or five, right? So I'll look at what are the different ways that I can get to that place that I'm trying to get to, right? And then try to optimize from there. And if plan A doesn't work out, throw that out the window. I got plan B ready to go, right? So that's the advice I'd give is decide what you want to do. That it's shit or get off the pot, right? That's not a time to be indecisive. So decide what you want to do. Even if you change it later, that's the great thing about cybersecurity. There's such a variety of different um, aspects to the career field. So even if you come out and you take a cyber analyst position,
Yep.
and then later you decide, well, my real passion is pen testing, you can absolutely pivot into pen testing from there if you want to, right? You can make any of those things happen. So decide what you want to do at that point in time, and take action. It's great to say, I'm gonna get a job as a cybersecurity analyst, right? But it's even better to say, let me look at, if I'm gonna stay in the defense industry, let me look at the Northrops, the Raytheons, Lockheed Martins. Let me see what those job descriptions for a cybersecurity analyst say, and then kind of synthesize that into, oh, well, they all called out security plus. Okay, that's key, something I need, right? Or they all called out this specific experience. Let me see what I can do to kind of gain some of that experience right now, right? So translate those things into actionable steps, and then execute that plan.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic advice. I mean, and I think you nailed it. That's really what it comes down to. Everybody I know who's gotten out, and all my army buddies who've transitioned into the civilian world. It's really been that has been the key to their success is having that plan, and really just executing. You can't take half measures. You can't half-ass it. You just got to go all in. And yeah, I think it's easy in the military. It's your life is so structured, even like your career. You have some say over it, right? You can either do the things that are needed to get promoted, and do all those things. But if
Mhm.
you don't, you're still on a very structured path that may take you however many years, right? But ultimately, you can spend 20 years and have really spent zero or very little time focusing on your career and your future because you're on this structured path. And I think that the scary part for a lot of people is when you get out into the civilian world, there is no structure anymore. It is a choose your own adventure where with infinite possibilities. And I think that's overwhelming for some people who, if you don't think about what do I want and then execute on that, but you're out there just wondering what, waiting for something to happen. It's not going to happen. Nothing happens. And that's scary. Right. So I think you nailed it. Have a plan and execute. Great advice.
If you don't mind, there's kind of a
Please.
couple other things that I gleaned from my time in the Navy that really bolster that. One, I was an E5. It might have been an E4. No, I was still a third class. I was E4 on the Blue Ridge, and I had a supervisor, and it's probably somewhere in the Army. Annually you give your what we call the brag sheet. So you write up, these are all the things I did over the last year, right?
Yeah.
Which you're racking your brain to try and remember, because I have trouble remembering what I ate for dinner 2 nights ago, right?
That's right.
But you're racking your brain like, oh man, the last year, what the fuck did I do? And my supervisor at the time was at E5, and he's like, you don't have a wheel book, the little green notebooks we carry in the
Yeah.
Navy. And I was like, no, what do you mean? So he goes to the cabinet and he grabs one and he throws it across the space. It hits me in the chest. And I'm like, what the fuck am I supposed to do with this? And he was like, all right, listen up, knucklehead. He was like, this is the part where you take the wheel and you guide your own career, because no one is going to take care of your career like you, right? And I was like, okay, what does that really mean? And he's like, so he takes my brag sheet, where I'd put conducted many maintenance checks, or fixed the Whiskey 6, SATCOM terminal, right, 4 times, and he's like, look, many maintenance checks, what does that mean? That's just fluff. He's like, that's BS. It doesn't mean anything. He's like, you should be logging exactly how many maintenance checks you did over the year, right? He's like, just tally them every day, tally them once a week, whatever, right? He's like, you fixed Whiskey 6. Okay, that's great. That's your NEC coded to do that. But what impact did that have on the command? What impact did that have on the admiral staff and the 7th Fleet, right? He's like, zoom out and look a little bigger. I was like, change my entire perspective on things.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's good advice for even current government employees, right? So when that Doge request comes in, and be like, oh, I've got, just open up your little green notebook. This is what I did last week. Boom.
That's
Done.
right.
Right. Yeah, I'm working. I love it. That's fantastic. Jen, this has been an absolute blast and a pleasure. I can't thank you enough for coming on the show. But before we go, can you tell everybody where they can find out more about you and where they can find out more about AeroVironment?
Sure. So AeroVironment, we are a public traded company. We have a website, avinc.com. And it's a really cool website. I'm not saying this just because I'm employed there, but I noticed that, when I was looking at, applying for the job that I have now, and they actually have a really cool interactive showroom, that shows all our different products and the capabilities, as well as a history of, the products that Paul McCready, engineered when he was, when it was a much smaller company. And then, me personally, much smaller footprint. You can find me on LinkedIn. I have a pretty unique name. So that's it.
That's awesome. All right. Well, thanks again. And until next time, Jen.
Thanks for listening to the Cyber Business Podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.